1. This happened last summer. I'm a waiter at one of the nicest restaurants in my hometown. I am pretty personable and always end up striking friendly conversations with my tables. I have 1.5 million stories about people who were seemingly very friendly, but ended up stiffing me on my tips. But this malicious complies, so I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't be a dick to your server until after you receive your food. It's a beautiful day, and the restaurant is on the water. Every nice day is absolutely packed. My restaurant does not take reservations of any kind, ever, so people have to go in person, request a table, leave, then come back later to eat. Normally locals understand and expect this, there is no problem. But we are a tourist town. When newcomers try to get tables, there is always trouble. This is important in a second. Now, I am swamped. I've had my section full for the entire day and hadn't had time to go on a single 5-minute break since the start of my double shift at 10 a.m. It's now around 6 p.m. A couple lands at one of my tables in the corner, and they are already upset because they already had to wait to get a table after a new girl had already tried to take a reservation for them over the phone, and they had to be called back and told that they had to come in to reserve a spot. I nod to them, acknowledging that I see them after I notice them glaring daggers at me, as if to say, "Get your butt over here now." I was dealing with a particularly shitty table at the time. Any server listening to this will know the type. Every freaking time you come back, they need something else. They ask for ketchup, you bring ketchup. Then, once you're back, they ask for refills on drinks. You run and do that. And then they need salt, and they want to order more food, blah blah blah. Now at this point, there are 2 things you need to understand. 1, they had sat around waiting for a table for over an hour before being sat. And 2, our restaurant has food runners. For those of you who are not familiar with this, it is a group of high school kids that for around 6% of all tips the restaurant receives, will take care of running your food to your table for you. Now I was the only person that treated the food runners like human beings instead of pack mules. Because of this, my food runners were very well organized and would happily help me out when I was swamped. A food runner had gone to my table, offered them water, brought them silverware, and told them I would be over shortly. 5 minutes later, I roll up and start my speech. "Hello, my name is Gray, and welcome to the restaurant. Sorry for the wait. As you can tell, I'm really busy and—"
"What's your name?"
"Gray. Gray."
"Why is this the first time you're coming to the table? We've been here waiting for over 45 minutes.
They had literally gotten there no more than 8 minutes ago, and thought I hadn't noticed them walk in.
You are by far the worst waiter I have ever seen. You should have greeted us and walked us to our table."
Another lie, as I saw the hostess do this like she does for every other person that eats here. Now I was already having a bad day, and I was on my second part of a double shift that I knew would go well past midnight, so I was having none of it. This guy goes on to insult my posture, my accent, my clothing, I'm wearing a fucking uniform, and a myriad of other things. At this point, I'm staring straight through him, not listening to a single word. Finally, he says,
"We want another server now. You should be fired for your incompetence."
I smile. He should not have asked for that. He basically just gave me the green light to fuck up the rest of his evening. I'm friends with everyone in the restaurant. When I have a request, it can actually be handled almost instantly. But this time was going to be different. I walk to the hostess table and see one of my best friends, Emma, crying under the counter. Emma is a 4'9" adorable Hispanic girl who was 20 years old. She was just a tiny little thing, and she needed a step stool to address people at the front desk. She had a cabinet that she could literally sit in and take naps, and she was in there crying. I gave her a big hug and asked her what was wrong. She said a couple had chewed her out for 10 minutes straight about how terrible she was. And guess who it was? My freaking table. I asked her if she wanted some revenge, and she said hell yes. I told her to take as long as she could, but apparently I was not good enough, and they wanted a new table. She smiled. She knew it was going to happen. I told my waiter buddy John that Emma was going to send him a table in an hour or so, and went back to work. That couple watched 3 tables sit down, order their food, eat, pay, and leave before they even got to order. They sat and waited the entire time just to try and stick it to me. The look on their faces as I happily and efficiently took care of my tables right in front of them was priceless. Since they were not my table anymore, I didn't visit them once. After they were moved, ate, and left, I asked the waiter that took their table how they were. He said they were very polite and patient with them. I think that will be the last time they treat waitstaff so horribly. 2. I'm a female and 50. This happened in spring of 1987, and I was a junior in high school. This was also the era when safe sex was pushed and condoms were given out at school. Remember this? I had this civics teacher. I'll call him Mr. P. Mr. P was, to put it simply, a sadistic, bullying prick. Mr. P didn't teach, but rather wrote a very brief summary of what we had to do on the board, gave us dittos to work on, and nothing much else. To say the class was dull is an understatement. While we worked, Mr. P liked to roam around the classroom looking for students who, in his opinion, were breaking a rule. If he found a student who met his criteria, he would spend his time doing his level best to embarrass that student in front of the whole class. He did this every class, and I mean every class. One day it was announced there would be a safe sex day in my school the following Monday, and the office was giving out condom pins, condom packages glued onto button pins, with the words "Practice Safe Sex" written across the front, and wanted us all to wear them on that day. Honestly, they were awful. Monday rolled around, and a lot of the students were wearing those pins, some even wearing multiples. One guy instead actually wore 2 long strips of condoms like bandoliers across his chest the entire day. Even during PE, it was hilarious. Others chose just to carry a condom in a shirt pocket, dress strap, or a hatband. I did the hatband, while the rest chose to opt out. Surprisingly, nobody in Mr. P's class wore a pin except for one girl. She was our class's quiet, smart student. She was shy, sweet, pretty, and got straight A's in all her classes. She did her work, never bothered anyone, and was liked by all of us. Her name was Grace. Well, for some unknown reason, Mr. P decided that Grace, his best student, was breaking a rule for wearing the stupid condom pin the school had provided. For the next 10 minutes, Mr. P stood over Grace's desk and made snide comments, poking fun at her choice of accessories, mocking the safe sex movement, and implying that there was no reason for a plain girl like her to ever need to practice safe sex. Remember, this was the 80s, so teachers tended to get away with this shit. Poor shy Grace just sat there crying, face red with embarrassment, until finally getting up and bolting out of class. Mr. P just smiled maliciously as the door slammed, then said, "That's why buttons and pins aren't welcome in my class." We all sat there in, at least for me, stunned disbelief at what Mr. P had done to Grace. Poor sweet innocent Grace, his best student. Forcing my body to unfreeze, me and 2 other girls got up to make sure Grace was okay. All 3 of us gave Mr. P dirty looks. One girl even flipped him off on her way out. We found her on the stairs and spent the rest of that period comforting her. I was so pissed at Mr. P for hurting Grace like that. A plan started forming in my head. So Mr. P didn't like buttons. Okay, time for payback, bitch. One thing you need to know about my old school, the teachers got away with a lot. However, one thing none of them could get away with was either openly ogling a student or commenting on a body part, i.e. legs, ass, breasts, etc. Doing so, especially in front of witnesses, would get you suspended, fired, or both. So I decided to break his precious rules in such a way that even though he saw it, he would be unable to say or do anything about it. Next day rolled around. I walked into his class, wearing tight jeans, combat boots, and a tight, low, but not too low, cut silver and electric blue lycra top, with several neon-colored decorations, including a quart-sized neon orange button right in the middle of my cleavage that read "Stop staring at my tits." I sat in the middle, front row seat right next to Grace. She looked sad and anxious, and waited for the bell to ring. Bell rang and Mr. P stomped in. He kind of walked like a duck. Slammed down a stack of dittos, he always did that. Wrote the chapter we'd be covering, told us we could get to work on our sheets, then sat down. I got my sheets, went back to my seat and waited. It didn't take long before Mr. P noticed my outfit and got up. He walked over, loomed over me, opened his mouth. Then he got a good look at what was written on that neon orange button. I could see that Mr. P knew that if he said one word about my button, he would be admitting to the entire class that he had gotten close enough to read it, thus had indeed been staring at my tits. His mouth closed with a very audible snap. His face turned an unflattering shade of beetroot red, then morphed into a full-blown catbutt face before spinning on his heel and going back to his desk. I could hear muffled snickering from my classmates as I just looked at him, smiling slightly, as he glared at me for the rest of the class. I glanced over at Grace, who looked at me in absolute shock that I'd not only outmaneuvered and embarrassed Mr. P, but had done so without uttering one word. Game, set, and match, bitch. I won that day, but in doing so, I ended up number 1 on Mr. P's shit list, and he spent the rest of my time in his class doing his level best to flunk me out. He didn't succeed, but came damn close, making him my target for the senior prank the following year. But that, dear readers, is another story. 3. This was 5 years ago. The company I used to work for was a metalworks company in the southeast of England. It had a 40-strong team of fabricators and fitters. We were hiring for an electrical engineer for some automation that we were branching into. I was also the guy training the engineers in what system they would be using. I got a word from the supervisor that they hired a guy, and he was from Europe. They warned me to speak slowly and clearly as English wasn't his strong suit. I told them to check his documents to check he can indeed work. I was told to keep my nose out and do my job. When I had spoken to the boss, he had a thick folder of pictures of electrical systems that he had built for home automation. I was a bit skeptical at first, especially as some of the pictures had stock photo plastered over them. I asked him to make sure he was sure about this, and if he had done the checks and made sure he was allowed to work. I was told the same thing. Keep your nose out of it and do your job. Okay. A month or so goes by, and I think he understands how the system works and how it should be used with all of the safety systems in place. So we take him to his site and leave him to do his thing while the rest of the guys get started on fitting security grill and railing all over the site. Me being the sucker, I agreed to help the rest of the team with the fitting and finishing, leaving our new engineer all alone. Big mistake. All power on the site cuts out, generator kicks in. All the lights come on and we discover smoke coming from the room where the fuse board is. An oh fuck moment has just dawned on everyone. What Gav had decided to do was try and wire the system to a 3-phase board without checking the board. Standard phase board right next to it, first red flag. This made the situation worse, as he somehow blew the entire board up and had to explain to the electrician why he has to install a new board. The second red flag came in the shape of a van filled with immigration officers wanting to speak to Gav about him working when he shouldn't have been. I asked if they had any proof of it being the same guy, and indeed it was. I pulled the boss to one side and told him the immigration officers want to talk to Gav and the boss. I could see the terror in his face and panic in his voice as he said, "Call the new guy so I can get rid of him fast." I politely reminded him that he should have checked before hiring him. He looked defeated. The immigration officers decide to wait around the corner, and just as Gav walked in, the van pulls in and swoop on the poor man and slap him in cuffs. The officers then load him into the van and drive off. A few weeks pass by, and the boss thinks he's in the clear. A few weeks later, and he has sent a letter telling him to make his way to the nearest home office building. To this day, I still don't know what they said to him, as he came back 2 hours later and closed up the workshop and never reopened. But it turns out he is still paying off a massive fine and couldn't afford to reopen. He was later arrested for tax evasion and fraud. Gav and I became friends, and the Home Office helped him become a British citizen, with some help that they offered, so he wasn't removed. 4. Backstory. I used to work at a small manufacturing plant in the shipping department up until a few months ago. Now the thing about this plant is that due to some well-intentioned mishandling by the previous owner, the plant is currently owned by the bank. Because of that, the plant manager doesn't really know too much about the day-to-day running of the plant. He mostly just makes sure the plant isn't losing the bank any money until a buyer can be found. Thankfully, there was a good floor manager and a good shipping manager to cover the shortcomings. Then the plant closes down for a bit. When we reopen, we learn that the floor manager is retiring immediately and won't be returning. But that means the plant manager is now the floor manager as well. Additionally, all other managers and office staff are now to work from home. So, on top of the floor manager, the plant manager now needs to handle any issues that arise that are too pressing to contact someone off-site. The structure of the shipping department is this. There's the shipping manager, who is now WFH. There is the shipping supervisor, who comes in early and leaves around 3-ish. Then there's me, who came in around 10 and left when the last truck to be loaded came, meaning that after 3-ish I am the de facto head of shipping. On to the MC. At some point I could see the writing on the wall. Layoffs were coming. Very possibly the whole plant closing. Needing something more stable, I found another job. Now, I hadn't given my 2 weeks yet because it wasn't set in stone yet. May as well have been, but until I have a piece of paper or an email that says I have the job, I don't have the job. I had one coworker on the production floor who liked to push my buttons. I'm typically not the type of person whose buttons you want to push. I'm not particularly imposing, but I've been told by guys twice my size that when I get mad, I'm scary. Anyways, on this particular day, he decides that the best way to push said buttons would be to walk into the forklift lane as I'm passing to grab a product to ship. Multiple times I'm forced to slam on the brakes, causing me to spill a couple of loads. Eventually I explode. I don't remember what was said, but I went off on this dude. Eventually the plant manager comes over trying to quell the situation. As I explain the situation to him, I say something to the effect of, "I could have killed him. I still might." To which the plant manager responded with, "If you're gonna be like that, just go." I looked at the clock and noticed it was close to 4, meaning if I left, no one was there to load the trucks. And while the physical act of loading a truck is simple enough, the system to record everything was not. And it wasn't something you could do later either. It needed to be recorded at the time of shipment. Naturally, I looked back at the plant manager and just blankly replied with an, "Okay." I grabbed my things and left. The second I got to my car, I called my supervisor. He and I are really cool with each other. You could even say we're friends. He also hates the coworker in question and is not too fond of the plant manager. I told him what was going on and he told me that he was off the clock and doesn't deal with work shit from home. Basically telling me he was with me without saying it. The shipping manager was the next call. Now, she is one of the nicest women I have ever met, and she will defend her crew to the death, and apparently, unbeknownst to me, she has started vacation the day prior, and would also not be dealing with work shit. Normally, she would absolutely deal with this even on vacation. Now, both of them knew I was leaving and that I didn't give a damn about the repercussions. The plant manager didn't. I don't know exactly what happened from there that day, but I do know that of the 12 trucks scheduled to ship, only 3 did. And that's because they showed up before I left. It's also worth noting that in our line of product, if something that was our fault causes the customer's production to shut down for any amount of time, the company gets fined. Contractually, not legally. In the end, that coworker never did mess with me again, and the plant manager ended up being a lot nicer to me too. 5. This happened while I was at my second command in the Navy. I am an aircraft structural mechanic, AM for short. We work on the aircraft body, tire and wheel, hydraulics, and any paint and corrosion issues. At the time, I was a second-class petty officer, think shift supervisor. I ran the command's paint shop on nights. We had a good system worked out with our maintenance control. They are the guys that direct all of the shops to ensure that one group isn't jacking an aircraft, while another needs to be inside it. Well, I would take care of the prep work throughout the week, make sure we had stencils cut, get paint from hazmat, and then Friday nights we would run through all of the touch-up paint jobs for 2 or 3 jets. Throughout the week, I would also be writing up maintenance actions, like a work order, for different spots we found on the jets. Usually trying for at least one in each area with a different paint color to account for the paint usage on the plane. Come Friday night, everyone else would leave early and my guys, one body from maintenance control, couldn't do work without them, One from maintenance admin, needed to complete our maintenance action, and myself would stay and paint the jets, so they would have time to dry over the weekend. We were usually out by midnight, sometimes 1 AM at the latest. This worked great for almost 2 years. Then we get some turnover in maintenance control and a brand new chief, think the worst middle managers you've ever dealt with, but with a gut and a coffee mug, decided he knew the best way to run my shop. Let's call him Chief Know Nothing. Monday night began with me being called into maintenance control. Chief Know Nothing told me he was implementing a new system. Every paint job now required its own maintenance action. His requirements were, if it wasn't connected by the same color or was more than 6 inches apart, it was a separate action. I tried to explain how this was a terrible idea, but it was shot down. He had made up his mind, and starting this week, I was to write up every spot I found as its own job. As a quick aside, this is a tactic used by Navy leadership to get more bodies under them. If the workload he is in charge of doubles, then he can argue he needs more bodies. It's a dick-swinging move and mostly just destroys a sailor's sleep schedule, as they shift from days to nights then back again. So, after complaining all night Monday, I am a sailor after all, and that's what we do best, I came to work Tuesday ready to maliciously comply. I picked one jet, and I wrote up everything I could find. 5 scratches on 1 landing gear, 5 separate maintenance actions. All of the jack points are scratched up. Well, that's 3 separate actions right there. Scratches through the pilot's name. Each letter gets its own maintenance action, possibly my favorite. Come Friday night, that jet had almost 3 pages of outstanding paint jobs waiting on it. The jet is going on a detachment Monday, and all of these have to be finished before it leaves. Everyone leaves except my shop, which is me and 3 other people. The Chief Know Nothing and maintenance admin. I prepped my guys for a long night and gave maintenance admin a heads up, because I'm not a monster. You see, the issue with the system that processes our maintenance actions is we could only be in work on 1 maintenance action at a time. I couldn't be a worker though, as I inspected their work. So I put all 3 of my guys in work, wait for them to finish those 3 jobs, inspect those 3 jobs, take them out of work on those 3, then put them in work on 3 new jobs, while I left the first ones to dry. I can't remember an exact number of how many jobs we had, but after starting at 4 PM, we finished painting around 4:30 AM. Then we went in shop and signed off every single one of those jobs on 1 computer, which was completed around 5:15 in the morning, and then sent over to Chief Know Nothing and our maintenance admin to finalize. I sent my guys home and then waited around for the chief to call me into maintenance control to sign for tools. That came around 6:45 from a very disgruntled Chief Know Nothing, who had some not nice things to say about how I ruined his weekend plans. Monday morning I get a call from my chief, still a terrible middle manager, but one that fights for me, asking why the hell I worked till nearly 7 on a Saturday. So I explained we wrote up every paint job, each individual paint job got its own maintenance action, as per Chief Know Nothing's request. After my chief finished laughing, he told me to show up early tonight, so we can figure out a new system. That new system? The same one that worked for the last 2 years without any issues. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, number 65. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. Well, as I make these, today was also errand day, which is always fun. Everything done though. Did that. Birthday card from a nephew. Top heating and power. Got myself some little treats while I was out, because why not? If you have to go out, you may as well have a little fun. Apologies if you can hear any loud snapping in the background as I record the outro. You shouldn't hear it in the actual video though. I've got the bug zapper on in the kitchen. It's that time of year where apparently I need to use the bug zapper again. Didn't think I had to, but apparently I do. And it's rather loud, the one in the kitchen. The one in the living room does its job. It works well. It makes noise, you hear it, but it's not that loud. The one in the kitchen makes me jump every time. Okay, and with that, I'm gonna head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.